Hello, everybody. How are you doing? I am excited. I'm excited about our show. I'm excited about the prospects for change within our country. And so we're just going to get right into it. All right. Trinidad and Tobago, our society is in crisis. These are hard pills to swallow, but we are resilient and we can be better than ever before. Together we aspire, together we achieve. These are our watchwords. We are a society. We are a society. Yes, it was coming up in the back. We are a society that are descendants of slaves and indentured laborers, and we know what generations have done to push us forward and what they have suffered for our current comforts. I know that in this society, we strive for every creed and race to have an equal place, but we are in crisis, and we have been in crisis for a long time. Our country is impacted by issues that affect vulnerable communities and how they impact the larger society. We will discuss police use of force and the heavy policing of certain areas, we will discuss. Adding to that, the looming fearful reality of an extremely high homicide rate, added with the fact that the rate of solving murders are also very low. We will discuss. To everyone who is tuned in today and who will see this in the future, I ask you to leave your bias at the door and enter this space as a Trinbagonian, where every creed, race, and location pin has an equal place. We respect our nation, we respect its people, the leadership, and the police. We want better, so we must do better. But we can only do better once we know what better can be. Today, I welcome internationally recognized criminologist, criminal psychologist, and artificial intelligence ethicist, Renée Cummings. I'm going to add you to my chat. I'm so excited. How are you?
Hello. I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for, listen, I know that you are in high demand all over the world. And I'm excited to be, to be able to have you on the show and to connect with you. Before we get into it, I just want you to look straight to camera and introduce yourself.
Okay, well, I'm Renee Cummings. I'm a criminologist and a criminal psychologist. I also work in artificial intelligence. I have been a criminologist for about 14 years now. Before that, I was a journalist and the
Wow.
first Caribbean on-camera female sportscaster. So I had an extensive career in
Wow.
media as a journalist as well. I have done a little bit of everything. I have worked in fashion. I've worked in entertainment. I once produced the Miss Trinidad and Tobago New York pageant, which was very successful and has produced an extraordinary amount of very, very successful women and mentors in New York as well. And I am just a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, and I love my country very much. And it's quite an honor to be doing this with you.
Listen, I am excited because now is a time when I know that your voice is always in the arena and your voice has been a part of many conversations as it pertains to what's happening in terms of the high homicide rate and even just crime in general in Trinidad, amongst other things. But now, what's happening in the world is that we are being forced to come to terms and find solutions with what needs to happen. And so, I ran those three things past you yesterday that we wanted to discuss. And so we are going to get into it. Now, before we start, actually, what I did want you to tell people about was what is artificial intelligence and how does that relate to, to some of the societal constructs that we already have that can probably form some biases.
All right. So artificial intelligence in its simplest form is a toolkit of systems that are built on algorithms. So right now, most people would know AI, let's say through Netflix, because everyone watches Netflix. So every time you watch a movie on Netflix and you come back on, it says, because you watched A, you will probably like these selections. So right there, that's predictive analytics. So that's the algorithm making a prediction for you. It's like if you go online shopping and you buy something on Amazon or you go on Fashion Nova or whatever site it is that you like. Do you know the next time you come on, you would see that because you bought this, you're going to probably like this, and X amount of people also purchase that. The other thing that happens, go on a particular website and you come back to your cell phone, you often see pictures from these websites. They're now on your page. Or you may have a conversation with someone on Facebook or WhatsApp about a particular product. And the next time you go on Instagram, you see the ad for that product on your page as well. So all of that is considered predictive analytics. And what we'll see it more and more now in is your cell phone. Some people do Facebook application to get onto their phones, or we're seeing it now with telemedicine. More people are coming online and you're having these conversations, or chatbots. Sometimes you are having a conversation with a chat in, right? So these are all digital too. So more, the other thing that we're going to see more of would be autonomous cars or autonomous weapons, right? Self-driving cars are coming now. And because of COVID-19, you would find that more and more people are going to want contactless interfaces, right? People don't want to touch. They don't want to see because nobody wants anyone to breathe on them. So if you're going in the future, you may have an elevator app on your phone. So you could use your phone to direct the elevator to where you want to go and don't have to go and touch the buttons that other people have touched. So artificial intelligence, right, it's really predictive analytics. It's considered data science and machine learning. That's the fields that create AI. And it really creates biases, because what has happened in artificial intelligence, it's because the data sets that it uses, it collects all this data from all these different systems that we have. So let's just, justice would be a perfect example. So in the criminal justice system, what has happened over the years is that the system itself wanted, the American criminal justice system wanted to be more expedient and more efficient. So it decided to use risk assessment tools. And these risk assessment tools would tabulate all these different data points, maybe your age, your education level, where you live, your zip code, your past criminal history.
They're forming a profile.
Right? If you've had any gang involvement, and all of these things tabulate to create a score to say whether or not Janelle is going to reoffend, or whether someone we can trust to really get back into the community. That's called your recidivism score. What has happened over the years is because the data that has been used has been so skewed, and because of systemic racism, you would appreciate that the data in the criminal justice system would not be very clean, right? It would be dirty data because it would have systemic racism and bias baked into it, because we know that police often over-police minority communities. So you would find Black and brown people getting arrested more. So so what happened in the system is they started to realize that Black and brown people were getting high because saying that definitely reoffend, and you felt non-people of color were getting lower scores. So there's been a lot of conversation about bias and discrimination, and I have been leading that conversation and really trying to ensure that we bring more diversity and equity and inclusion to artificial intelligence, because while a lot of people are still thinking about what's happening on the ground, what's happening in a digital space is already being stacked up against a lot of Black and brown people. So the chokehold that we saw on the streets where George Floyd became a victim of that, you may find that they're using predictive analytics to create digital tools that may give you a digital chokehold. So there's already digital profiling, there's digital redlining, which means that your credit score is going to be a permanent score that is mixed to your criminal record. So you find there are lots of things that are happening that needs to be checked. So yes, there's bias and discrimination there in the system, and AI ethicists like myself who are committed to social justice and committed to racial justice, ensuring that these things are corrected and the tools that are created, the design of these tools are done in a very fair way to ensure there's equity, not only in the use of the product, but in the representation of people of color in technology as well. So that's it in a nutshell.
Well, I'm going to tell you, thank you so much for leading that charge, okay? Because we need it. I want, okay, so in the past few days, there has been an eruption of protest in Trinidad, and it has been due to the killings of 3 men who were unarmed, in MOVA. That brought a lot of the people who live in vulnerable communities in Trinidad, and as we like to call them, the ghetto, out. The ones from MOVA, from Carnage, from Sea Lots, from Beetham, they all took to the streets. And it has enraged a lot of people because they believe that, that there should not be this type of negativity against the police. And then in reverse, it has also encouraged a lot of people to continue the cry, right? That there has been issues with police in the community. What is the classification of what a vulnerable community is, and why is it important that the larger society, or is it important for the larger society to care what happens in those communities?
Right. So a vulnerable community is usually a community that we consider that is underserved, meaning that the community lacks an extraordinary amount of resources. It is also vulnerable because there's not a lot of investment in those communities. So vulnerability could be anything from social, it could be psychological, it could be financial. So there's usually a disinvestment in those communities. It's also communities where there are lots of what we call criminogenic. Now, let me explain that criminogenic is not criminal. Criminogenic means that there are certain factors, socioeconomic factors, make criminality or criminal behavior more of a vulnerability. So you may find that a disorganized community, there may be situations of dilapidation, social isolation from what we may consider the main culture. Many people in those communities struggling every day and feeling as though they're not acquiring the kind of success that they want. There's something called relative deprivation. So when they look at their circumstance and they look at other communities, they find that somehow they are not getting the resources they think that they deserve. When they look at public health in those areas, healthcare, whether or not their garbage is being picked up daily, whether or not, they have curbside appeal, all these things that other communities may have. Do they have security when they call the police? Do the police respond to them in a timely manner? Do they get the kinds of services that they require? So vulnerable communities are communities that are in desperate need of resources, and usually communities that feel disenfranchised or they feel marginalized. So that's your vulnerable community.
Mm-hmm. I saw a post yesterday where someone posted many of the government programs that exist in Trinidad that are free, low cost, accessible. And the point of posting that was to say, here are government programs that are free. Here are government programs that are accessible for everyone, but they're not being accessed. What are some of the challenges that people who live in vulnerable communities may have? That, let's say, the average person who might be more lower income. What's that difference? Because
so let me just do this with you. So we shouldn't be speaking about people in vulnerable communities as though they're alien, like people in vulnerable communities. What people in vulnerable communities are people. And we need to just start with that premise. They are people, and they have aspirations, and they have goals, and they have dreams, and they have everything else. When they go to sleep and they dream, they probably dream fantastic things about themselves, like everyone else. What they do have would be a lack of resources, and they may not have all the protective factors required. So protective factors are usually your income level, financial support, maybe other support from other family members to assist you. It could be the job that you have. It could be access to savings. It could be long-term planning. Those are the protective factors that you find that sometimes people who find success a little easier may have those things there. So the situation in the vulnerable communities when it comes to accessing programs is that you would find that there are many challenges people have when it comes to accessing programs. So we think the programs are there and they are well advertised, but I can tell you, I don't know what some of those programs are, right? And I could read. So the fact of the matter is that, sometimes how the programs are advertised. It's also how the programs are sold to people. If you sell something to people, making them feel that, well, this is for you, but the other people have this, you really don't know. So even when it comes to government programs, when it comes to packaging those programs, they must be done in a very attractive way. It must also be programs that are very competitive. So a perfect example of a program that's very competitive that I will promote, Columbia University has an extraordinary program for individuals coming out of the prison system, what we call returning citizens. And the program is an artificial intelligence program, teaching them data science, teaching them AI, ensuring that once they come out, they are now able to get into the market at a very competitive rate, because AI is the most competitive thing happening right now in the world. So that's a program that doesn't sound like a hand-me-down program, right? Correct. They didn't say that you're going to learn to shine shoes, not that shining shoes, anything is wrong with that, but they give you something that is competitive, and something that is competitive in the now. So it's really how you package the programs, how you sell the programs. Also, when people have other vulnerabilities, because you have a program, doesn't mean that somebody's going to have the income to go to the program and come home every day. That takes money. So you're going to a program, you've got to pay to get there, you've got to pay to come home. Do you have childcare if you have to leave? Are there other responsibilities that you may have at home that need to be dealt with, right? When you go to the program, do you have money to get lunch? So people think about that. Do they have money to get lunch when they get to the program? So when you start to add up lunch money, transportation money, somehow the program doesn't sound that free anymore, right?
Correct.
So there's a cost.
And it's their job after the program as well, too. People complain about they are not able to find employment. So is there a job after? And when you put on your resume that you are from a certain area, the likelihood of you getting that job is going to depend on where you put.
So then that comes back to bias and prejudice and discrimination in the society, and whether or not we allow those things to continue. I mean, this is a very small country, Trinidad and Tobago. Why should living in Moba or living in Sea Lots really impact you when it comes to getting a job? It's a place in this country, and it doesn't mean that because there may be some people in the country who are involved in negative behavior that everyone needs to be sacrificed. So that speaks a lot to the general mentality of the persons who are doing the hiring, if that would be the business community. I don't know if it's government offices. I don't know where people are going, but it really speaks to the mentality of those people in the HR department. And I think if you are in HR, you really need to check those biases and prejudices at the door, because what you're doing there is really not right.
Absolutely. I wanted to read you a statement that was made by one of the young men from the protest, right? And what he said is that he said that I don't just now, hold on, I want to get the right one for you. About these protests is about identity and respect. We poor and we might not be as great in academics and everything, and we have wrongdoers here, but we are people. We mean something. We are people. There is a lot of commentary on social media that is very disrespectful to people from certain communities. And they hear that feedback and it doesn't make them feel good. And there is an outcry because they are unable, some of them, with what they're saying, are unable to articulate what they really mean.
We have to look at people as people. Everybody wants respect. Everyone wants to feel appreciated. So what the young man is saying is, don't judge me on my academic qualifications. Judge me because I'm a human being. Find out about me. I may have extraordinary potential. But if we are biased, if we apply certain prejudices because of where people live or the schools that they come from, what we do is we miss the opportunity. So it's really another question about diversity. And what he's saying is it's just about identity. Everyone wants to feel respected. And I think we've got to treat people with respect. So when I was saying to you that program from Columbia, what they've assured these young men when they've come out of the criminal justice system is, we are giving you a job that says that we respect you. We are giving you a job to earn a particular income that makes you feel respected. We are not making you feel like a second-class citizen. If you treat people in a particular way and you make them feel as though they are not included, well, what happens in that situation is that they become alienated, and the more alienated they become isolated, and with alienation and isolation and frustration and intergenerational challenges in those communities, what you find is people who become very angry, what we call free floating anger, and they really are angry with society. It's not that they don't want to help themselves. I think everyone wants to see themselves doing better, but for some people it's a challenge. And this is what he is right what he says. Look at me as like don't these are the preconceived notions and understand the challenges that I may be facing. So yes, so I think he makes an excellent point, and I think people need to think about that.
And that is one of the main points of even us having this conversation, is that people can start to think about what it really means for what's happening in some of these communities. I want to start to mosey on over to talk a little bit about what the outcry has been, and it is about what we're seeing a lot in the media is police using an extreme amount of force, and what people have been accepting as also normalized behavior. There has been countless videos where police go into communities and they do an exercise, and they leave with a body in a trunk. There's no investigation, there's no follow-up. What does that do to communities, and what does that say about our current state of our police service?
Right. So when you think about what we would call our high needs communities, historically they've had a very volatile and contentious relationship with police. And that's not unique to Trinidad and Tobago. That's everywhere in the world. There are high need communities and there are police officers. If you look at the history of policing, police were created to police the poor. That's how it was created in the late 1800s in London, right? The Metropolitan Police created by Mr. Sir Peel. So it's really to police what they call the underclass. So the approach of policing historically is really to apply a lot of pressure on these groups, because they were seen as almost like a disease, as something that could infect the rest of society. That's something that they didn't want to mingle with the rest of society. Now, historically in our communities in Trinidad, there's always been that very contentious relationship, and across the world, even the US. What people have said who come from underserved communities, and in the US it would be communities of color, we may not be underserved there, many of the communities, but there's that race relationship. What they say is that police often use more aggression in those communities that they would use in other communities. So that is very much a valid claim, and over the many years, when it comes to reforming police, they've looked at that relationship between communities and police. The other thing that people feel is that they don't get the required services they need from the police. So when something happens, the police don't turn up, the police don't do the investigation, but every time there is an incident, they find the police would use an extraordinary amount of force. Then there's also the relationship between police and young men of color, or young Black men in Trinidad and Tobago, or young African men in Trinidad and Tobago, and that very contentious relationship they have. And you would realize that those young men in those communities actually know those police officers on a first name basis, because they come into contact with each other. So
they know each other.
They know each other very well. So when you look at that relationship and you combine police treatment sometimes, and not all police officers treat people in communities badly. There are some officers who would do it because they're in a position of power. And you've got to understand with policing, police officers are probably the only public servants, people who work, for the state, who are able to use force in their job, who can use violence as part of their job, and who also have an extraordinary amount of discretion. A police officer can decide to give you a ticket, or he or she may decide not to. They could decide to charge you, or may decide to give you a chance, right? So they have an extraordinary amount of discretion. And when you combine that with power, they are very, very powerful positions. So it has always been contentious. And I think we have never done sufficient work in Trinidad and Tobago from a community policing perspective to really build a better relationship. When it comes to crime fighting, the police and the community are co-producers in keeping a crime rate down. The police cannot keep crime down without the help of communities. Hence the reason witnesses don't really come forward in certain communities. Hence, when people see things, they probably will not say. So policing is about trust and it's about confidence, because when it comes to policing, the issue is legitimacy. People want to know that the decisions that police officers make are legitimate decisions, that they're doing the right thing. And you could only believe it is legitimate if it is transparent, if their behavior is, if they're accountable, and if there's public trust and public confidence. Without trust in the police, there is no integrity in the police. So this is why it's very important. So you would find now in the United States, because of George Floyd, because of many instances of deadly force used against men of color, we've been forced now to think about defunding the police, which means reimagining how policing is done. So what you will see in the US going forward is what you will see is an upgrade of community policing. And that upgrade of community policing is requiring now that the police must have the community at the table when they're coming up with their operational strategies. So what we are going to see in the US moving forward, and it's going to eventually spill down into Trinidad and Tobago and the rest of the Caribbean and anywhere in the world where people of color are police, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, wherever it is. What we are going to be seeing more is police having to include, to do that stakeholder engagement, to do that public engagement, because many of the strategies that are being called for now, even in the Senate in the US, is community-led strategies. So that community relationship is a critical aspect of policing. There's also something called legal cynicism. And legal cynicism in criminology and in the law speaks to the fact when people are in a community and they don't believe the actions of the police to be legitimate. So they see you come into the community and they see you slap someone, or they see you use excessive force in a situation, or there's you into a home to serve a warrant and you break up people's furniture and you walk on their bed. Little children are crying, screaming because it's a very traumatic experience. And when they see doing those things, people start to believe, but wait a minute, I don't think your actions are legitimate because you've come, right? And a mother is there and she's right. So those are the local terms that people would use, right? And it's not that they say wicked, they're just saying that, listen, given all the frustration, given all the trauma that we've experienced, why do you keep coming into our communities and treating us without respect? And listen, everybody wants respect. So legal cynicism says when people believe the police not to be legitimate and believe the police are unable to provide the safety and security they need and unable to provide justice in real time, they take actions into their own hands. So you'd find in some because they know the justice system is very slow, because they know it may take forever, because they may believe that they will not get fair justice. Many people, communities decide on doing things for their own. So when you combine all of those, see some of the challenges that we have. When it comes to police behavior, police are supposed to use, first of all, policing is about protecting and serving. Most police officers don't ever use a gun in their lifetime. Some of them do. One of the things that we have seen with policing, and this is one of the places artificial intelligence plays a very critical role now in policing because it has been able to do predictive analytics to create early warning systems. So usually you would find in the US, in the UK, internationally, when a police officer uses force, he or she has got to go in and they've got to write out what force they've used, no matter how much force.
A report.
Incidents of force are logged as data into a computer. So when the computer starts to realize that this individual has used force 5, 6, 7 times, that individual is now flagged. And HR has to step and either provide you with some sort of intervention, some sort of psychological assessment. It could be psychiatric, you could be having problems at home, you could be in a situation of some sort of stress that they need to take you off of the street and they need to figure out what is going on with you, right? And then if it's too much force, then they realize that they've got to do something else, either discipline you or maybe get you off of the job. You would notice in many of the cases now in the US, when the stories come out, they would say this particular officer, the officer who used the knee to George Floyd's neck, had about 17 disciplinary actions, none of them with serious, serious repercussions. So when it comes to policing, community policing is very huge. There's a relationship that needs to happen. The community is supposed to be treated with respect. There's supposed to be conversations with the community and officers at all times. Officers need the communities and the communities need officers. So it's a very symbiotic relationship. And when officers do things that make the community feel that their behavior is not done in a transparent or accountable way, what people do is they lose trust. And once there is no transparency, there is no trust, there's a lack of confidence, and there's a breakdown in two groups of people. And when I'm talking about communities, I'm talking about all communities, right?
Communities.
Another
Mm-hmm.
might be the LGBTQ community that often says when they go to the police, or gay men, or
Mm-hmm.
transgendered men go to the police, or not, I'm not transgendered men, I'm sorry, transgendered
And
individuals who
individuals,
go
yes.
to the community, the police will find that sometimes they don't get the kind of respect, or they don't get the attention, as a woman who may be a victim of sexual assault, or a woman who may be a victim of intimate partner violence or domestic violence. So there are many communities that I'm speaking about, not just those communities. So there are many communities who feel that somehow they don't, or persons with disabilities, right? Who may go to the police. So who feel that they are not getting fair treatment and
They're not being
equitable
heard.
treatment, right? So community policing is very, very big, and we've got to look at that. But also remember that police officers are trained and they are licensed and they are constitutionally able to use force. But they too have got to know when it's necessary force and when that force is unnecessary. And they too have got to use their discretion. I think in
Mm-hmm.
Trinidad and Tobago, one of the things that we have seen from the TTPS is the introduction of non-lethal weapons, right? Things like tasers, although tasers are lethal depending on who,
Correct.
if you are epileptic, or if you have used drugs or alcohol, if you are pregnant, if you have a disability, if you suffer with anxiety and you have mental illness, a taser is definitely a very deadly instrument. If you are probably not, it may not be that deadly. So there are other things that officers can use, right? So there's something called the use of force continuum. It is not, it depends on what the situation is and what the officer is trained to use. So there are many things that come into play when it comes to an interaction, but you've got to look at that history of contentious and volatile relationship. You've got to look at things like stigmatization and
Mm-hmm.
stereotypes, misrepresentation, and how we think about people in particular communities. We've got to look at
Mm-hmm.
our view, what we call implicit bias.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people may feel that people who exist in a particular community may not be worth it, or may not deserve the respect. And they go in another community and they behave in a particular way. So we've got to look at all of
Mm-hmm.
those things. And this is why it's critical for officers to be trained, for officers to get that international good practices when it comes to training, and to really understand what policing is about. And this is why I always encourage officers to study things like criminology, forensics,
Mm-hmm.
police science, and also psychology. Study these things. So it gives you a better perspective of how you are supposed to do your job. It also makes you more efficient, and it
Mm-hmm.
really coins the professional. And that's what you want to be seen as a
You know,
professional.
I am very happy that you said that, because in Trinidad, we tend to be in Caribbean people, we're very kind of casual people. And so it translates into our jobs as customer service people. We're kind of anything is anything. And it does translate as well into the police service. Another thought, and I'm glad that you talked about implicit bias, is the fact that people say, well, we're all black here. It's either you're Indian or you're Negro, right? The police force is the majority is black. So if they're arresting people, or if they're doing certain things in certain communities, it's kind of okay. It's not the same
Implicit
as what's
bias,
happening in the US.
implicit bias is not only race. Implicit bias is just bias and prejudice. So although it's not a situation with a white officer and a person of color in Trinidad, all of us are people of color, so it's all of us here. You've got to remember something like systemic racism is something that is so deeply rooted in the psyche. It is something that we think about that is linked to the enslavement of African people. It's linked to colonial thinking. Because the colonizers are no longer here, doesn't mean you have the colonizers' mentality. So you are trained oftentimes to disrespect your own, to treat, so
Correct.
the colonizers left and you are doing the colonizers' bidding. And you've got to think about that. And that is how deep implicit and subconscious bias is. So
Mm-hmm.
that's systemic discrimination that we have here, systemic bias. So don't look at it as racism, and it's just the same. It's just a spill off of what we are seeing. So many officers come from those same communities,
Mm-hmm.
because those are the ones who go for the jobs to become police officers, and then they go back in the community, and those people in the community, if they want to call, those are your neighbors. Sometimes those are the people you grew up with. Those are the people you know. Sometimes they're your family members, right? Trinidad and Tobago
Correct.
is a very
Correct.
society. We are all related to all different types. This is who makes us who we are. So it really comes back to training. It comes back to your training. It comes back to the culture of the organization. It comes back to how that training, how advanced that training is. And it really comes back to the skill set and what is required. It also comes back to, particularly in Trinidad and Tobago, the fact that many of us don't know our rights. So you would find 1964 in the US, there was the Civil Rights Act. Most people know about Dr. King. They know about Stephen Carmichael. They know about all these great individuals who created that civil rights movement. In Trinidad and Tobago, I think we don't understand that we have rights. So when people are protesting in one community, it's not they're protesting. It's about solidarity because it's about equal access. It's about opportunity. And those are rights that we all deserve. Good education, the right to practice religion, to vote, to protest. You know, the other thing about protesting is in Trinidad and Tobago, we may not understand that protesting is very organized. The United States has a history of protest movements. Not only Dr. King, we've seen the Black Panther movement, we have seen gay rights, we have seen disability rights, we have seen feminism, we've seen the right to vote. So there are centuries of protest action. So it's very, very strategic. So there are nonprofits who support protesters. There's things like the American Civil Liberties Union, right, that protect the rights. There are lawyers, there are civil rights lawyers, the whole body. You know, there are many shoulders that lift protesters up. So I think in Trinidad and Tobago, because we don't really understand or speak to civil rights, because we don't have that solidarity, and I've noticed over the years, there's this great desire for people to feel better than. You know, so if I live in a particular area, that makes me better than.
Why can't you just get it together?
That's nonsense, you know, and people need to just get over themselves with that and realize this is a small country. And if everyone is doing good, it means the country is doing better. And you
my gosh.
In Trinidad and Tobago, if we leave certain communities behind. So oftentimes on social media, people come and they say things, and that's fine. It's their page, it's their post, and it's about freedom of expression. But I think sometimes we've always got to go back to that place of empathy and compassion and understanding. And you just never know. It's not where you start, it's always where you finish. And I think you never know when you may need. I think if anything, COVID-19 has shown us is that the jobs we thought that were essential became non-essential. The people who thought they were
look up to
came, right? So it was the women particularly, and people of color and people who had the lower socioeconomic status and job were the ones we were depending on to help save our lives. So I'm hoping that COVID-19 brought a particular level of reckoning so people could just check themselves and understand that people need help. And ask yourself, you know, am I a good neighbor? Ask yourself that.
Correct.
Something people need.
Yes, check the people, Renée. I love it. Last week I interviewed Mohammed Mowakil, and he compared the interaction between police and criminals. So we're moving into our crime phase now, as Hercules and the Hydra, right? Which is cutting off the head, and it just keeps growing back over and over and over again, and causing, a lot of issues in community. When police come and they kill somebody's son or husband or brother, revenge is sought after them. And we, of course, heard Prime Minister Rowley talk about justice, not revenge. There is the crime rate in Trinidad, the homicide rate in Trinidad is extremely
right. So, but that system, you have to understand that if there's no justice, there's no closure. So when you look at the detection rate in Trinidad and Tobago and how many people have not been held for something like homicide or maybe sexual assault or maybe rape, you understand how many families. And when one person is murdered, it's just not one person grieving. It's sometimes a generation that's going to grieve. Yeah. So if there's no justice, what you have is an open wound. And there are many open wounds in this country.
Yes.
Every time it comes back into the community and there's a particular use of force and there's another murder and there is no justice, or the investigation never comes up with what people are hoping is going to come up with, it's like putting salt in that wound. So right now there are lots of open wounds walking around in Trinidad and Tobago. There's a lot of intergenerational trauma, right? There's a lot of intergenerational anger because of the trauma, fact that people have not received justice. And when you combine all of those things, with frustration. Check is coming from. There are many mouths to feed. Now, because of this pandemic, people are losing their jobs. Some people are not going to get jobs for a
Their
very
jobs
long
back.
time.
Correct.
Right? If you were expecting family members who would come from the US or come from the UK and bring money and bring things and send
Mm-hmm.
barrels and do all of these things. Remember, those people now who are living in New York and living in the UK and living in Europe, the other family members, their financial situation is not the same. So there's
Correct.
going to be pressure. So where there is pressure and where there is frustration and where there is trauma, creating a situation that makes it conducive to certain types of behaviors to happen, sometimes as a reaction to the situation. So we've got to make that clear. Yeah?
Listen, yes, Renee, I'm so excited and I'm glad that you're on. I wanted, you have been very outspoken about solutions in which we can use to combat crime, right? Can we talk about some of those solutions that can be used to curtail this crime problem that we have? And are all the criminals or all the people who committing murders, are they all from underserved communities?
No, I don't think they're all from underserved communities. In Trinidad and Tobago, we've seen it's homicide. We see that homicide could be related to domestic violence and intimate partner violence. We've had child murders of children. I think over the last, I'm not, because I'm so much in the artificial intelligence world now, I've not been focusing a lot on the crime statistics in Trinidad and Tobago because much of my work now is on crime statistics in the US again. So my mind is not, I'm not that fresh on it. But I can tell you this now, when it comes to solutions, the
Mhm.
first solution to reduce a crime rate, particularly a homicide rate, is a high solvency rate, which means
Mm.
that crimes are solved.
Have
So
to
if
be
your
solved.
detection rate is low, it means that people are emboldened to perpetrate crime. Because in
Mm.
Trinidad, our detection rate has been less than 20%,
You can
probably
get
for the
away
last
with murder.
year. Not only get away with it, you can get away with murders on some days 100%, some days 90%, and on the average
Rennie,
day, 100%.
sometimes I make this bad joke and it's really bad joke, but I always say Trinidad is the tourism crime capital of the world. If you wanted to kill somebody, you could bring them here, kill them, and you will never go to jail.
Well, let's hope that changes, right? So the number one way to solve your problem and to reduce your homicide rate is to increase your detection rate.
Mm-hmm.
Internationally, the detection rate is usually between 65 to 75. So let's say the NYPD, their detection rate is usually around 70%, which they think is very bad. Eh? In the US, on average, 65% now. Some years it used to be 80%. Ours is 15%. So that speaks to the fact that officers need training. That speaks to the fact that we need to really, bolster things like forensics, bolster things like how do we do an investigation? How do we gather the evidence?
Mm.
How do we store the evidence? How do we take that evidence to court? How do we build cases? These are very, very important. So you've got to look at that. That's the one thing. The other thing is we've got to look at what we've created as a society. So if it is in Trinidad and Tobago, there's intergenerational anger, there's intergenerational trauma, there are lots of socioeconomic challenges, there are lots of people feeling frustrated, there are lots of young men who have fallen out of the education system, where the education system is no longer prepared for them. You're going to have
Mm-hmm.
a that's already percolating. If there's a lot of disparity in your society between the haves and the have-not, you are going to get a situation that is percolating. The other thing is technology. And
Mm-hmm.
technology now lets us see what the other person is doing in real time. So
Correct.
everyone lives, right,
The
like the
high life.
Carters,
Yes.
right? Everybody
Yes.
wants to look like others. So you can't say because people in a particular neighborhood, they shouldn't have the best. Everybody wants the best phone, the best car, the best outfits. That's what people want. So you've
Correct.
got to look at all of those things. I think as a society, and we have got to think about our neighbors in a better way. As a country, we have never really designed a proper strategy to deal with violence. You need a national violence prevention program. You need a
Mm-hmm.
national harm reduction strategy. you also need public education and public engagement so people could know what is my role in reducing crime and criminality. You need to have programs in the community, crime prevention programs that are homegrown, community growth. Communities have got to take ownership for their own communities, but they need resources because we've got to build back resilience in communities. We've got to build cohesion in communities. Communities have got to build themselves up and protect themselves from the things that are infiltrating. And the things that are infiltrating are also in the communities. They're in the families, they're in the home. So people in a community know the child who's being abused. They know who's being sexually abused. They know who's a victim of violence. They know these things. But if they don't have a good relationship with the police, they're not going to call. And if they have their own problems, they're going to say, listen, I have problems in here. I can't study their problems there. And if it is that they're in the community already, there's a lot of suspicion between neighbors. People don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to be tomorrow's homicide statistic, right?
Correct.
There are many challenges. So this is why we've got to take an evidence-based approach to crime prevention. And an evidence-based approach is a scientific approach where you're using data correctly to map out the kinds of strategies that are required. That's the other reason you need professionals, right? So you need to go to your institutions and pull your criminologists out, pull your psychologists, your social workers, and bring them into the planning process. Your pediatricians, your forensics, psychologists, your forensic teams. You've got to be collaborative and multidisciplinary because no one has one personality. There is no one approach. There are many approaches that need to come together to reduce a crime rate. And I think we have never taken that really, we've spoken about it. All administrations have spoken about taking a whole of government approach. None of them have delivered on it. And I think the challenge is we create these fantastic programs, and then the programs just do not have the intellectual and capacity to really take it forward. And oftentimes they don't have as much skill set. So you may have a program, and in that program, you may only have 2 people who really understand what the program is supposed to do, or 3 people. So it really needs a very broad perspective, and you need to use the talent, and we need to come up with strategies from pre-K to seniors, because seniors are also victims of crime, financial crime. As well as we see many seniors may have people come into their homes and have become victims of homicide as well. So as I said, you've got to have all over the world where there's a homicide rate and where there's crime and where there's a police and where there's a judicial system. There are also strategies, national prevention strategies when it comes to crime, when it comes to homicide, when it comes to domestic violence, interpersonal violence, child abuse. All of these things have to happen at the same time. And once they're happening at the same time, they reduce the crime rate. In Trinidad and Tobago, the other thing we've got to pay attention to is early exposure to violence. And they say that early exposure to violence is the greatest predictor that somebody is going to use violence later in life. And what we have in this society, when you look at the high levels of child abuse, you know that there are being exposed to violence at an early age. And if there is no intervention, they are going to be using violence. So many of the teens and young adults who are using violence, just walk back through their history and you will see that they at a very early time. So it takes a lot. It's a lot of work, but Trinidad and Tobago is a society with resources. We have an extraordinary amount of talent. We have some very, very nationals, and we have every little resource that we have. We have scholars, we have sportsmen, we have great mentors, we have musicians, creatives, designers. We have Trinidadians.
We have God. God is a Trini. Everybody know that,
right? We have so it's about courage, and it's about commitment. It's about forgetting those biases and prejudices and that nonsense, forgetting all this identity, who's better and who's not better, and who's this party and who's that party, and who's this color and who's that, and come together as a very small society and show the world what we have. We have the talent, we have the tenacity, and I think we can get it done.
And we got Renée Cummings. I mean, thank you tremendously. You know, I am so happy. They say your network is your net worth. And I can tell you guys, I'm going to tell you guys this, listen, my family and Renee's family are very well connected. In fact, I mean, so well connected, but one of my favorite people in your family, of course, is your aunt Yasmin Leeward, who taught me Spanish diligently for about 6 years. And so, you come from great stock, Renee, a good old Chagonas girl, just like myself. We all live on former sugarcane lands, and we're making it, and we're doing like Harriet Tubman, and we're going back and we're bringing people forward. Thank you.
Yes, we are, man. And it is, I mean, I've never met you in person, and I look forward to meeting you. And thank you. We finally got to do this, and thank
Yes.
you for the opportunity.
No, thank you so much for just being right on time and for sharing your perspective. It's going to help and heal a lot of people. And I'm just so grateful. Thank you so much, Renee.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Bye. Guys, listen, I'm excited. I'm excited about where we can go in Trinidad, guys. Guys, I'm Trini to my bone. Trini in my heart, Trini in my soul. And I needed to have this conversation, guys. I needed to have this conversation. And we're going to continue having these conversations. We're going to be talking to some of those people in vulnerable communities. I want to talk to some people who I know who have gotten out of situations, when other people in their family didn't excel, but they did against odds. Guys, we are Caribbean people. We're Trinidadians. We're human. Okay? Everyone here is somebody. Check your bias. Check your bias. 3 weeks ago, we were all saying Black Lives Matter. We were ready to close down people's businesses in Trinidad. Now we're saying, well, that doesn't apply to us in Trinidad. It does. It does, because there is implicit bias, okay? And trust me, the rerun and the clips will be running, because I want everyone to understand what is happening. What is happening and how do we fix it? Not because you are not in a vulnerable community or you have not been exposed to trauma. It means that you cannot understand what's going on. You can definitely understand what's going on. And I'm going to provide you with the information so that you can understand what's going on. Our police system needs to be reformed. Not today, not yesterday. It's been a while and it has to happen and it will happen. Okay, guys? Thank you so much. My name is Jay Lover. You guys know I am a content producer, journalist, traveler, entrepreneur, global woman, Trinbagonian American. Such a pleasure to be here with you guys. Guys, on my show, Checking In, I talk to real people and we tell real stories amplified. Have a great weekend.